front of a large desk and made money. All day long he worked, cutting out pennies and shillings and half-crowns and threepenny bits. And he brought them home with him in his little black bag. Sometimes he would give some to Jane and Michael for their money boxes, and when he couldn't spare any, he would say, "The bank is broken," and they would know he hadn't made much money that day. Well, Mr. Banks went off with his black bag, and Mrs. Banks went into the drawing-room and sat there all day long writing letters to the papers and begging them to send some nannies to her at once as she was waiting, and upstairs in the nursery, Jane and Michael watched at the window and wondered who would come. They were glad Katie Nana had gone, for they had never liked her. She was old and fat and smelt of barley water. Anything they thought would be better than Katie Nana, if not much better. When the afternoon began to die away behind the park, Mrs. Brillin-Ellen came to give them their supper and to bath the twins. And after supper, Jane and Michael sat at the window watching for Mr. Banks to come home and listening to the sound of the east wind blowing through the naked branches of the cherry trees in the lane. The trees themselves, turning and bending in the half-light, looked as though they had gone mad and were dancing their roots out of the ground. "There he is," said Michael, pointing suddenly to a shape that banged heavily against the gate. Jane peered through the gathering darkness. "That's not Daddy," she said. "It's somebody else." Then the shape tossed and bent under the wind, lifted the latch of the gate, and they could see that it belonged to a woman who was holding her hat on with one hand and carrying a bag in the other. As they watched, Jane and Michael saw a curious thing happen. As soon as the shape was inside the gate, the wind seemed to catch her up into the air and fling her at the house. It was as though it had flung her first at the gate, waited for her to open it, and then lifted and thrown her, bag and all, at the front door. The watching children heard a terrific bang, and as she landed, the whole house shook. "How funny! I've never seen that happen before," said Michael. "Let's go and see who it is," said Jane, and taking Michael's arm, she drew him away from the window, through the nursery, and out onto the landing. From there, they always had a good view of anything that happened in the front hall. Presently, they saw their mother coming out of the drawing-room with a visitor following her. Jane and Michael could see that the newcomer had shiny black hair. "Rather like a wooden Dutch doll," whispered Jane, and that she was thin, with large feet and hands, and small, rather peering blue eyes. "You'll find that they are very nice children," Mrs. Banks was saying. Michael's elbow gave a sharp dig at Jane's ribs. "And that they give no trouble at all," continued Mrs. Banks uncertainly, as if she herself didn't really believe what she was saying. They heard the visitor sniff as though she didn't either. "Now, about references," Mrs. Banks went on. "Oh, I make it a rule never to give references," said the other firmly. Mrs. Banks stared. "But I thought it was usual," she said. "I mean, I understood people always did." "A very old-fashioned idea to my mind," Jane and Michael heard the stern voice say. "Very old-fashioned, quite out of date, as you might say." Now, if there was one thing Mrs. Banks did not like, it was to be thought old-fashioned. She just couldn't bear it, so she said quickly, "Very well, then, we won't bother about them. I only asked, of course, in case you, required it. The nursery is upstairs." And she led the way towards the staircase, talking all the time without stopping once. And because she was doing that, Mrs. Banks did not notice what was happening behind her. But Jane and Michael, watching from the top landing, had an excellent view of the extraordinary thing the visitor now did. Certainly she followed Mrs. Banks upstairs, but not in the usual way. With her large bag in her hands, she slid gracefully up the banisters and arrived at the landing at the same time as Mrs. Banks. Such a thing Jane and Michael knew had never been done before. Down, of course, for they had often done it themselves, but up, never. They gazed curiously at the strange new visitor. "Well, that's all settled then." A sigh of relief came from the children's mother. "Quite. As long as I'm satisfied," said the other, wiping her nose with a large red and white bandana handkerchief.